behaved you all are when we're doing these talks. It's totally different to a Sunday morning. Very quiet. Makes me nervous. Good evening, everyone, and a really warm welcome to Ipswich Minster, both for those in person and those online, for this, the 8th instalment of our A Church for England series. Here, as many of you will know by now, we are seeking to create a space where we can explore what a good Church of England should look like for the nation it serves through the lens of the most vital issues of our time. Tonight, fittingly for Interfaith Week, we are exploring the increasingly crucial issue of how we live well in our diverse and multi-religious society, and more specifically for us, what a good Church of England should look like, particularly for those of other religious faiths. To help us explore that tonight, giving us a perspective from Judaism, we are honoured to welcome as our speaker a dear friend of mine, and hopefully soon to be yours too, Rabbi Miriam Lorie. Miriam is not just an extraordinarily wonderful human being, I know that from personal experience, but she is also an inspiration and a pioneer. She is the first British woman to become an Orthodox rabbi, currently serving in the Kehilat Nashira community in Boreham Wood. She is a rabbinic scholar to the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance and a chaplain at Finchley Memorial Hospital. Characteristic of any rabbi, Miriam is a teacher. Some of you may have already benefited from her wisdom through her contributions to BBC Radio 2's Pause for Thought, but through her ministry she also prepares adults and students approaching Bar Mitzvah. Before entering the rabbinate, Miriam worked at the Cambridge Interfaith Programme and the Jewish Leadership Council, and before that read theology and religious studies at Cambridge, which I can assure you only the best people do, as well as undertaking 6 years of full-time Jewish yeshiva study. It really is such a joy and a privilege to welcome Miriam tonight. She's travelled a good distance to get here on public transport, and she is a much in-demand speaker. So please join me in giving her a really warm Ipswich Minster welcome to Rabbi Miriam Lorie.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for that exceptionally warm welcome and introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And if I may, I'd like to start with gratitude to Reverend Tom Mumford, the esteemed vicar here. Reverend Tom and I met at the Westminster Abbey Fellowship last year. And although we have different faiths and backgrounds, we warmed to one another instantly as fellow people of the cloth. And it wasn't long before we were talking shop, comparing congregations, his and this stunning, historic church, now a proud minster, and mine, then in a school hall, now with our own proud upgrade to a crumbling warehouse. And Reverend Tom was, throughout our time on the fellowship, an inspiration, a colleague, and an ally. So thank you for the friendship, Reverend Tom, and thank you for hosting me here tonight. So beyond my lovely congregation of about 100 adults, 50 kids in our warehouse, what can I share about myself by way of introduction? I grew up as a Jewish girl in Boreham Wood, Hertfordshire. My Judaism, both itself and in relation to other faiths, has been a defining feature of my life. It was in the songs and stories of my early years. It was the Shabbat, Sabbath, morning sitting on my father's knee in synagogue. It was the festivals we celebrated, the food we ate, or indeed didn't eat, as we observed kosher laws. And in secondary school, I became fascinated by religion. How could my Christian and Muslim and Hindu friends believe their gods ran the world, while in Sunday school I was taught something different? Which one was true? And this mission to discover the truth made me sign up to study theology at university, but first take a gap year in Jerusalem's Old City, in a Jewish seminary just for girls, to learn my own texts in great depth. And there in Jerusalem, aged 17, 18, I sat in my required long skirt and long sleeves, listening to sweet, long-bearded rabbis teach my own ancient texts, while hearing out the window the muezzin's call, and the chiming of the bells of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And in that moment, I remember clearly Jerusalem felt like a place of perfect coexistence. Or at least it could and should have been. This was in the middle of the Second Intifada, after all. But I continue to have faith that coexistence can be possible, and more on this later. Theology at university was altogether a different study experience. While my year at seminary in Jerusalem was filled with warmth, prayer, singing, and faith, an academic theology degree represented a much more clinical, detached approach to studying religions. I actually avoided studying Judaism at university for quite a long time, not wanting to put my beloved Torah through the fire of biblical criticism, not wanting to use words like ancient cult and ritual to describe what I understood to be my people's precious biblical stories. So instead, I studied Islam, Buddhism, and lots of Christian thought of Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, and Barth, thinkers who this congregation will be more familiar with than my own. And another favourite paper was Jewish and Christian responses to the Holocaust. One heavy part of that was discovering that Christian history has a heavy legacy of anti-Jewish theology and sentiment. And to this day, some remnants persist, and I'll touch on this later too. But back to my own journey of faith and study, I remember a transformative conversation with a friend who persuaded me that faith can survive the furnace of biblical criticism. She said that while she may never know with certainty that the one God wrote the Torah, choosing to live your life as if this is the case is a different, faithful path. And so I did eventually delve into the world of J, E, P, D, and Q, and I came out not unchanged, but nevertheless a Jew who continued to lean into her tradition. Something else which sparked for me at university was a strong belief that women were underrepresented in Orthodox Judaism, in a way that was not actually warranted by the actual Jewish law, which I held to be sacred. In practice, in the Orthodox world in which I was born, women were entirely spectators in the synagogue, literally in an observation gallery or behind a curtain, with men carrying out the entirety of the worship and the entirety of chanting from the Torah. But then I began to see a couple of niche settings around the world where women took more active roles within Orthodox Judaism, and it inspired me. At university, for the first time, I learnt to chant a chapter of the book of Esther, chapter 4, in Hebrew from a scroll to read at the festival of Purim. I fell in love with the words I'd learnt, and it became my chapter, and to this day I can recite it by heart. So I feel really blessed that in my life I've been able to take forward these two passions and fascinations. First, my interest in religions and interfaith dialogue. The first 7 years of my career was spent at the Wolf Institute and the Cambridge Interfaith Programme, where I was lucky enough to develop scriptural reasoning for public audiences. Scriptural reasoning, and there's a great website you can find if you Google it, is a form of interfaith dialogue through text study. In it, Jews, Christians, and Muslims sit together and read passages from the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran. And then my second life passion has been over the years to have taken on more roles as an Orthodox Jewish woman, learning to chant from the Torah, learning to lead prayers, community organizing. And this led with many steps along the way to embarking on training to become a rabbi over 5 years ago. I graduated in June 2024, around the time I met Reverend Tom, and today I feel incredibly proud and humbled to be a female Orthodox rabbi leading a community. There have been struggles as a female Orthodox rabbi. Most Orthodox rabbis in the country, despite the good relationships I have with some of them, don't recognize me as either Orthodox or a rabbi or both. So I've had to find colleagues and allies elsewhere. It's not just on a personal level, there are structural challenges. Weddings and conversions that I conduct will not be recognized by certain sections of the community, which has implications for my congregants too. But in general, I feel like I'm living the dream. My day-to-day work includes lots of teaching, sermon writing, service planning, a bit of radio and print journalism, and trying to maintain my own study and spiritual life. I feel very blessed to do this work, and sometimes I feel like I need to pinch myself. So now to the meat of tonight's subject. What a good Church of England could look like from the perspective of other faiths, but particularly tonight from Judaism. First of all, it's easy to take for granted that we live in a country with religious freedom, tolerance, and mutual respect. Even though it is an established church, the Church of England has used its position and influence to advocate for freedom of religion for all, to encourage respect and inclusion of other faiths, and to help shape the laws and institutions that protect those freedoms. The freedom dignity I enjoy as a Jew in England is something I am deeply grateful for, and it underpins everything else I'll say. I love that we're a country unembarrassed to have religion at its heart. I feel proud to see Christian ministers at state events, to hear prayers offered at moments of national importance, like Remembrance Day yesterday and this past Sunday, to witness clergy woven into the life of the monarchy and the government. My son has just started at a school with a Christian foundation, and I like that he has chapel every week, learning some of the same hymns I grew up hearing and singing, even as a Jewish child in Britain. I do respect when parents of other faiths choose for their children to opt out of chapel, and perhaps I'm privileged to feel confident that my son receives a strong enough Jewish grounding at home, but I'm glad he goes. I like that he experiences the unifying power of singing together, the inspiration of a rousing sermon, and the quiet dignity of shared reflection. These moments remind him that life has a moral and spiritual dimension, that community is built not only on achievement, but on meaning. But I'm conscious that this is not a universal instinct, and it makes me sad to see religion sometimes watered down or treated as an awkward relic of the past. As a Jew, I don't want to see Christmas turned into a winter festival, or Easter reduced to an excuse for chocolate eggs. I want to see these holy days celebrated for what they truly are, festivals of joy, hope, faith, and light. I want our national life to have the confidence to draw on its spiritual inheritance without fear of offending those of us who come from different traditions. Most of us, I think, don't feel excluded by the presence of faith, only by its absence. When the Church of England celebrates its festivals fully and authentically, it invites others to do the same, to bring their own lights, songs, and prayers into the public square. And I'm also really grateful for the Church of England's bravery in tackling difficult issues and holding in beautiful tension a commitment to tradition and rootedness while being planted firmly in today's world. I'm grateful for its courageous decisions. In particular right now, the appointment of Sarah Mullally, a woman as the new Archbishop of Canterbury. As a female rabbi, this is just amazing to see. And it has serious ripples in my world too. One Orthodox rabbi in America, Yososcha Katz, wrote the following: with the recent appointment of Senai Takaichi as Japan's first female prime minister and Sarah Mullally as the first female Archbishop of Canterbury, it's hard not to wonder, perhaps the time has come to recalibrate our own gender norms. The current reality feels untenable, a spiritual stain. The most conservative religious and political institutions across the globe are slowly acknowledging that classical gender hierarchies are outdated and outmoded, while we, Jews, remain mired in the norms of yesteryear. So thank you, C of E. So a good Church of England, from the perspective of other faiths, is one that leads with conviction, yet holds space for others. It is not afraid to speak of God in public, but it does so with generosity and humility. It knows that a confident Christianity helps create the conditions in which other faiths can also flourish. As my amazing Christian theology teacher and boss at the Cambridge Interfaith Programme, Professor David Ford, said, the best interfaith relationships are built not on pretending we are all the same, but on a better quality of disagreement. From a Jewish point of view, this generosity of spirit matters deeply. Our histories as Jews and Christians are intertwined, sometimes painfully so. For centuries, the relationship between Christianity and Judaism was marked by misunderstanding, suspicion, and worse. But in recent decades, we have witnessed a remarkable transformation, with dialogue replacing polemic and friendship replacing fear. A good Church of England, for me, continues this journey of reconciliation, not out of guilt or political correctness, but from a genuine spiritual quest. Such a church also does have the courage to look inward and to face its own shadows honestly. You will all know better than me about the way the Jews or the Pharisees are described in the Gospels. I don't think it's always flattering. So ensuring this doesn't seep out into perceptions of Jews today is ongoing work. Grappling with difficult or uncomfortable texts is something that I too take very seriously in my religious life. So I know well the challenges of holding reverence to the text in tension with conversations of today. But just as we are learning to contextualize and interpret the way the Bible speaks about the death penalty, or disability, or virginity, or rape victims, or gay men, so too a good Church of England continues to reverse a legacy of anti-Jewish prejudice. But I would go even further than that and say that a good Church of England doesn't just give space for other faiths, but vocally stands up for them, for us, when we are threatened. And sadly, this is a time where my community feels deep unease and fear. As Reverend Tom mentioned, I'm a hospital chaplain, and I speak to Jewish patients who tell me they're afraid to mention their religion, who do not request kosher food when that would be their preference, who keep their prayer book tucked away. It breaks my heart that in modern Britain, a nation of freedom and tolerance, anyone should feel they must conceal a part of their identity. Christians too have known times when open faith carried risk, and sadly that shadow has once again fallen on many Jews. The late great Chief Rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sacks, said, "The Jewish community can't fight anti-Semitism alone. We need allies." This is a time in history where Jewish practices and values, shechita, which is kosher slaughter of meat, and brit milah, circumcision, mandated in the very Old Testament that you follow too, are under threat. It's a time when Jews are tucking their Star of David or Hebrew necklaces in. It's a time when my younger son's Jewish primary school has high metal fences, 4 security guards at any one time, and when I'm part of a parent security rota where I wear an incredibly heavy stab and bulletproof vest. While Jews may be epigenetically hardwired to be hypervigilant to threats, I sadly don't think these measures are alarmist. I've watched as a wave of deadly attacks against synagogues and Jewish schools has moved through Europe. My colleague Rabbi Rebecca Blady was in a synagogue in Halle in Germany when a shooter entered. 2 people were killed that day. My French rabbinic colleagues talk of new swastikas appearing on Jewish buildings by the week. One shared a video recently of a man outside her apartment shouting Heil Hitler. And the attack in Manchester on Yom Kippur confirmed our worst fears. I was running services that day, the holiest day of our year, when we fast for 25 hours and pray almost non-stop. Orthodox Jews don't use electricity, including mobile phones, over the Sabbath or festivals. So I didn't know what had happened until our security guard passed news to me of what had happened. With little information and none of my usual WhatsApp network of colleagues to discuss with, I needed to decide in that moment the if, how, and when to share what had happened with my congregation, who also didn't have phones on them. At that stage, we were afraid that Manchester would be part of a coordinated series of attacks. So I clearly needed to ask my community not to congregate outside the building, to make their way quickly home after the service. It also felt important for me to say prayers for the injured. At that stage, I didn't know that there were casualties. But was this a security moment, or a pastoral one, or a spiritual one, or all 3? Just a taste of the kind of challenges that we're dealing with. This is a difficult time in history for Jews. So a good Church of England, for me, stands with Jews, affirming that we should be able to live openly Jewish lives, to wear symbols, to eat and pray and practice without fear, as our tradition commands. When this happens, and it does, it sends a ripple of reassurance through our community that is hard to describe. It says, you are part of our nation's story and we stand by you. And when that happens, it means so, so much. Anti-Semitism in 2025 is inescapably wound up with Israel and Gaza. And let's be clear, criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitism. But if only it was that easy to draw a clear line between the two. It's not. And to leave this out of tonight's talk would, I think, be to ignore an elephant in the room. It's such a deeply emotive and complex topic. It's one, as you probably know, which divides Jews in this country just as it divides wider society. So I want to say this tonight. I understand that Christians care about Israel and Palestine. I understand that it is the Holy Land for you as it is for me. I understand that as we head towards December, your thoughts and hearts turn to Bethlehem and Nazareth and Jerusalem. I also understand that Christians have always stood with the oppressed and the suffering. And without a doubt, Palestinians are suffering. Gazans have suffered immensely, particularly over the past 2 years. As a rabbi, I have consistently spoken about this, and I've sometimes been criticised for it by fellow Jews. But what I ask of the Church of England is this. If you say that Jesus was a Palestinian, please in the same breath say that he was a Jew. Please don't politicise your connection to the Holy Land by picking a side and importing the conflict here. I ask that empathy is the starting point in this conflict. And empathy, thankfully, is not a limited resource. We can empathise with the horrific circumstances Gazans have endured, constant death, destruction and displacement. And we can empathise with the families of over 2,000 Israelis, mainly civilians, killed on October the 7th, and the hostages and their families. What I ask of the Church of England is not to slip into the terrifyingly binary way this conflict has been portrayed by the media and by activists. Instead, please stand with anyone who wants peace. Stand with anyone against using violence as a solution. Stand with the Bereaved Parents Forum, where Israeli and Palestinian families bereaved by this conflict come together to work for a different future. Stand with Omdim B'Yachad, Standing Together, a coalition of Palestinians and Israelis on the ground who are working for a fair, equitable and free future for all. These voices, sadly, are not amplified enough, but they exist, and if I have any hope for the future, it's from these people. So for me, a good Church of England comes to these tricky issues with empathy and humanity, not shying away from the call of justice, but understanding the complexity of bringing about both justice and peace and actively working towards them. Tomorrow morning, I will meet local Christian, Muslim, Hare Krishna, Sikh and Jain community members at our local county community building. Led by our mayor, Alpha Collins, we will do a 2.5-mile walk from synagogue to church to community centre to mosque. And I will be offering walkers rugala, delicious Jewish chocolate pastries, as they come past the doors of my synagogue. But I couldn't tell you about them tonight without bringing some along for you all, so there are some at the back, and please do enjoy them. Hospitality, I think, is a perfect metaphor for interfaith interactions, something else I learned from Professor David Ford. It's the move like Abraham, all of our ancestor, who opened his tent from all 4 sides, searching for guests and literally running and sprinting to pull them in, invite them in, and give them hospitality. And whether it's literally inviting people into your space for food, or whether it's figuratively having a conversation and inviting them into your religious world, inviting someone in, making them comfortable, it almost always leads to reciprocal hospitality and becomes a virtuous cycle. So this is what you've done tonight at Ipswich Minster. I've been welcomed into this sanctuary and this community, and I felt the warmth of your hospitality, even if not the warmth of the church heating system. We do have some reciprocal hospitality lined up with Reverend Tom coming to my synagogue in January, something I'm really looking forward to. And I extend the invitation to anyone here to be in touch, to visit my community, and to continue this conversation, something that I hope we'll be able to do through some questions in just a moment. So thank you all so much.
Miriam, despite the lack of heating and warmth within the building, you have, I think, warmed our hearts by your presence, by your wisdom, by your encouragement, your honesty, and I know that speaking as you have and sharing those experiences will have, I'm sure, touched and challenged many of us here. And thank you for offering that so openly. Such richness there, and I'm not going to keep talking because, as you all know, a clergyman in front of a microphone quickly turns into a sermon. So I want to open this up to a conversation. Please raise your hands if you'd like to ask Miriam any questions before we go and enjoy her really quite lovely pastries at the back.
Yes, my name is Carl. Did the film Yentl have any inspiration upon you becoming an Orthodox rabbi?
So I've actually never seen the film Yentl. This is, I've got to, right? It's an absolute iconic film that I must see. So it's with Barbara Streisand, and she's a girl who wants to study in yeshiva, so she dresses up as a boy. Yeah, no, thank you. That's such a reminder for me to have a Yentl film night. But no, I don't know what The truth is, I had no idea I could take this path until I was in my 20s, because of that phrase that you might have heard, you cannot be what you cannot see. And growing up, I didn't see any female rabbis. I later went on to discover that they existed in other denominations, but in the Orthodox tradition, none at all. And that was until my late 20s when a brilliant woman called Dina Brower, who was actually married to an Orthodox male rabbi, she undertook exactly the same study as me at the same institution as me, scandalizing the whole United Synagogue, because it was one of their own who kind of went all feminist on them. So she was really my inspiration, and she received a lot of heat of the bad kind, a lot of critique, and that really scared me going into it, because I'm a bit of a people pleaser, so taking on a route which would get me a lot of flack wasn't a natural choice. But I suppose eventually I felt if I really believed in this enough, and I was in the right place at the right time to be part of a wave of change, then how could I not? So I did actually a bit of coaching about stepping into the decision with joy rather than fear, and was amazingly pleasantly surprised by a huge wave of support and enthusiasm for my decision to become a rabbi. And I've really had very, very little negativity, which has just been the biggest blessing. So yeah, onwards and upwards. We need more and more women to do it, to make it, not just a one-off, but an actual movement.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your talk. Tomorrow I'm going to a mosque to give a health seminar there. We have a wonderful, I won't say liberal, but open Muslim community here, which I have great joy in. I do wonder whether you can ever foresee Muslim or Islam embracing a female leader in any form.
I mean, I'd love there to be a female Muslim here to answer your question, because I can't speak for Muslims. But I do have some amazing Muslim colleagues there are one or two who would love there to be female imams. A brilliant woman to look out for is Julie Siddiqui, who has she's campaigned for a lot of very important things, but one of them is women just having a decent space in the mosque. Because often, and actually this is the same in Orthodox Judaism, the women's section is like the bit where the bins are, or sometimes it's just locked and someone forgets to open it, or the chairs are stacked up. No one bothers with it because you're the spectators, you're not where the action is. So that's something she's campaigned for. I think women in Islam are taking on more and more, but I think I don't know. We joke in the Jewish community that England is 20 years behind America, so maybe we could say the Muslim community is 20 years behind the Jewish community. I think it will happen eventually.
Thank you. Yes, Interfaith Week seems to be a good opportunity to try to understand how the three Abrahamic faiths can come together. And as a chaplaincy volunteer at the local hospital, I've been to visit 2 mosques today. I didn't ask them any difficult questions about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, but I still struggle to understand how much is due to politics and how much is due to faith. But my question for you really is, how has this conflict affected the Jewish faith community in this country?
Yeah. It's affected us hugely. In so many different ways. I think I could probably divide it into 2 sections. So the impact of October the 7th and then the impact of the ensuing war. So I think October the 7th really knocked the whole community in a way that I'm not sure that non-Jews in this country quite understand how connected Jews here are with Israel. So most of us have relatives there. My own brother and sister live there. Or if not, you'd have cousins or friends or someone who's moved there. And then beyond that, it represents, at least for me, I would say, a kind of safe sanctuary, a place where if I really had to run, I could run there. It feels quite vulnerable for me to share that. But then to see that country compromised in that way, with the number of casualties, and then I think 1,000 terrorists came into the country that day, and the scenes of the Nova Dance Festival, it was just really, really had a big impact. And because of the size of our community and our connections with Israel, almost everyone knew someone who was involved. So my husband had met someone who was killed in a kibbutz on October the 7th. She was an English teacher who'd come over to a conference he helped run in England. She was out for a jog with her husband that morning, and they were both shot. So we were just all impacted in some way. And then the scale of the hostages was just unthinkable. There have always been hostages, but one here, two there, but 200 was just unbelievable. Also, actually, I was running synagogue services on the day that we started to hear noise, and we started to hear, what had happened, and that was another similar experience to Yom Kippur in a way of, oh my goodness, is this real? Where's my phone, and what do I do? So I think, that something about our defences felt very knocked after October the 7th. But then very, very quickly, as the military response started, it felt like the tide of sympathy immediately turned away from the Jewish community towards Gazans. And we've all had our own journey with this. And as I said, Jews are so across the spectrum on it. I think eventually for me, I've ended up feeling like Israel's military response just went far too far. And find it, that's been a really internal struggle for me. It's been the first time in my life that I've not been able to say I stand with Israel, because I really haven't in the last 2 years. But at the beginning, it felt like some kind of response was necessary, and then to see very, very quickly the kind of tide of public opinion turn against Israel, that was also difficult for Jews. And then since then, I think, for the first time ever, it's been embarrassing to say, I'm going to Israel. I went to Israel last December for my cousin's wedding. Some people I just wouldn't say I was going, because that became very embarrassing. Or people, as I've mentioned, would hide their faith in different ways. I think for university students, it's been probably the most difficult out of everyone, because they have been, unfortunately, have been targeted even if they're not outwardly Zionist, just for being Jews. And I think there's been some really awful scenes of aggression and protests and storming buildings. That that's students with their hot-headed black and white approaches. It's not something that most of us have to deal with every day. So it's had a really, really big impact, and I don't know where we go from here. I don't know how our community will settle. I'm yet to see that settling, actually. I think there's a lot of paranoia out there, and I think the Manchester attack, unfortunately, just embedded that. And I personally am interested to see ways where my community can regain its trust in the world outside, and not turn inwards, and not have such a everyone's out to get us approach, because I don't think that serves us or the country.
Can I just abuse the chair slightly? I've got the microphone and no one's going to stop me, so I'm going to. You've had an amazing kind of pupillage in the Christian tradition. David Ford, the person who was a Regis Professor of Divinity at Cambridge and spent a lot of time with him. Could I ask, what are are the similarities and the things that unite Christians and Jews that perhaps we don't make enough of?
Interesting. Okay. I mean, the Bible's got to be the first one. My best friend at school is a religious Christian. She's now running a church school in Zimbabwe. And I remember once she said something about the Psalms, and she was like, "Oh, you won't know about that, that's in our Bible." And I was like, "Martha, that's in my Bible too." And she was really shocked and surprised that the Psalms were part of the Jewish Bible. I think she just assumed they were part of the New Testament. So yeah, our Bible, I think, has got to be number one. I think probably the way that our biblical texts have trickled down into the way our society is organised is quite similar. Generally, I would say there's probably more that is similar between Judaism and Islam than Judaism and Christianity, because we have such a strong focus on law, like Muslims. And there is Christian law. It's not quite the same. Jewish law is, actually to study to be a rabbi is to study Jewish law. They assume that you come knowing the whole Bible, so there's basically no Bible lessons at rabbinical school.
I saw another hand. Gregor's going to make me go all the way to the end.
Thank you so much for that talk. Thank you for your generosity and the authentic insights that you offered. Question on the House of Lords. What's your perspective on having Anglican bishops in the House of Lords? Would you like to see that stay the same? Or would you like to see representation of other faiths or anything else? Any thoughts on it?
Oh gosh, this is where my absolute ignorance shows up. I really don't know anything about the House of Lords, I've got to be honest. Yeah, I mean, and having done this programme with Reverend Tom in Westminster, I definitely should know more than I do. My instinct is I'm happy with it. I'm happy with this country having a Christian foundation. I don't think the country should have an interfaith foundation. But that's probably because the Church of England has been so brilliant at making space for other faiths and not kind of crowding us out or having a laïcité-like system like France. So, yeah, I'm happy for it to stay. It's working for me.
Doesn't look like there are any more questions. One more.
I don't know quite how to put this delicately, but so I'll just blurt it out. Just to try and find something positive out of the conflicts in Israel at the moment, it's provided a wonderful opportunity for me to share faith with friends of mine who are not of any faith. They are asking questions about the history. They're reading books about Jerusalem. They're asking me questions about it, which I don't feel always qualified to answer. So I think out of every situation, there is often a positive side to look at. And I think there's more interest, non-believing people and the media in the history of Israel and the history of that part of the world. So I just want to share that to encourage.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, and I really agree with that. And maybe I could have said more about this, but I see religion not as the problem in Israel-Palestine, but as the potential solution. Because they're not actually fighting about religion at all. And if they sat down together and studied the stories of Abraham, for example, right now in our Torah reading cycle, we are reading the stories of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael and Isaac. And those stories, when you read them closely, like really closely, can I give a little Torah talk? Okay. So anyone who's read these chapters closely, they might have noticed a place mentioned 3 times, I think, called Be'er Lahai. It's one of those things that when you read it, you're like, oh, blah, 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 another place name. But I think this place, Be'er Lahai, represents a really fascinating clue into some kind of sub-story going on. So the first time it's mentioned is where Hagar ends up in when she's banished from Abraham and Sarah's house. So this is clearly the place that's associated with Hagar and say Ishmael.
You're talking about Genesis at the moment.
Genesis. Yeah, the book of Genesis. The second time it comes up, Isaac is just coming from that place, Be'er Lahai-Roi, and there's a Jewish commentary that says on that he had gone there after the death of Sarah to bring Hagar back to marry Abraham again. So he was matchmaking for his father to bring about a reconciliation between this banished woman who becomes the mother of Islam. And so you have this idea that Abraham and Hagar married again and came back together. And then the final time Be'er Lahai-Roi is mentioned is after Abraham's death, when, incidentally, Isaac and Ishmael, the fathers of Judaism and father of Islam, bury their father together. So they are together, they're friends at this point. And then where do they all end up living? Be'er Lahai-Roi. They're all living together. This family, which was so broken and divided, ends up reconciling and living together at the end of the Torah portion that my community will read this Sabbath. And I think, if Jews and Muslims could study that together, they would get so much hope from that, and religion could be a real source of knitting them together. And that rather than fighting over Hebron, why don't they just all go and worship together at the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, and Rachel's grave, and all of these places which have such deep religious significance because they're mentioned throughout our religious texts. I really think religion could be the uniting force if we can just knock everyone's heads together and get them. Well, look, it's a lot more difficult than that, isn't it? There's a lot of deep-rooted trauma that's only been more deeply rooted over the last 2 years. But I have hope. I really do have hope.
Miriam, I think that is the perfect place to draw this to a close. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your generosity, your insight. I mean, even just that last bit here, talking about the book of Genesis and teaching us in that, and it's a ministry that you have offered so generously this evening. Thank you so much. And please can we give Miriam another massive round of applause. Please, I should have said refreshments and everything at the back. Thank you.
That's so kind of you.